Welcome back to the MMA Museum podcast. I'm Miguel, and once again, we have a very special guest, and we're going north of the border for the man they called the Butcher, Bill Mahood. Bill has joined us here on the MMA podcast. Bill, how are you?
Doing awesome, Miguel. It's been a long time, buddy.
It has been a while. You look great, and
Thank you.
but let's get right into it. I remember, you when you fought at Bodog and stuff. But let's go back to the very beginning. Researching here, you came to the sport. You were a little older. You weren't a young kid when you saw UFC, and you were already in your 20s and stuff. What'd you do beforehand? Did you school sports, and did you brawl in the streets? Give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah, my dad was a pro boxer and a businessman. So, I kind of grew up in the boxing gym, and from the boxing gym to, different martial arts gyms. So I always had something martial arts wise. I liked the team sports a bit, played a little bit of rugby, but for the most part, I didn't like relying on other people. So the martial arts kind of spoke to me. So really, I was involved in the martial arts, or boxing from the time I was like 5 or 6 years old. And
Okay.
I grew up north in British Columbia. So, pretty tough place, and you had to be able to take care of yourself.
Yeah. I know that there's a lot of like street fights and stuff like that. I remember you had a student, Cajun Johnson, that kind of had carried the flag for you on street fights, like took the flag from you. Talk a little bit about that. Is that something that you just kind of had to fight, like, other kids or stuff, or was it something that you kind of you're calling?
I got a crazy dog going on here. I had to get rid of it here, but no, Cajun. Yeah. When we started the PG Fight Club, and I didn't have my first pro fight till I was like 33.
Yeah.
And Cajun came in at about probably 17 to join the fight club because he was getting beat up because he was living out on a res. And, he was only mulatto kid. So, he was having a tough time and came in to learn how to fight. And it was right at the beginning. I was going down to Vegas to train with John Lewis because there was nothing in Canada. Even Vancouver, a couple of years into it, I met Dennis Kang, and really it was him and me. Vancouver was nothing. Even Vegas, like John Lewis had JSEC, and that was it. There was nothing else in there. And a couple of years into JSEC, then John JSEC had that, and then Mark Lehman split off and he did Cobra Kai. But yeah, back then, man, it was nothing.
So you would go to Vegas in the original John Lewis days in the 90s.
Oh God, yeah. Like my first trip to Vegas, I don't know when my first trip to Vegas would have been, maybe 2000. He had JSEC, little hole in the wall spot. And guys like Roy Nelson were just starting. I remember when I think Roy got his brown belt, and he didn't want to do any fights. Guys like Tito were coming up, and oh yeah, Chuck was coming up. Rico Rodriguez was there. It was a little gym, but it was a little hotbed.
And by then, Mark Lehman, Lehman's jiu-jitsu is, they had him on the TV show because, he doesn't have a big MMA record or anything like that, but his jiu-jitsu, and he's a controversial guy. Did he ever rub you the wrong way or anything?
No, I always got along great with him. And I remember when I was coming down, I would do privates with him because John was always busy club promoting and stuff, right? So I would do privates with Mark. Mark was only a brown belt. And he had a buddy of his who used to come sleep in the closet of the gym, and they'd play Halo like all day long. This guy had never had any fights, but he had cool jiu-jitsu. That was Mayhem Miller.
Oh.
Never had a fight. He would just come up and he'd be like the guy that I'd roll with when Mark gave the privates.
I got you.
That's how long that is.
That's drinking up some good knowledge to bring back to Canada too. That's kind of, I guess, what you can earn the forefather or the godfather kind of two ways, just by being old or by backing it up too. And you got you're backing it up. So did they have a boxing coach down there? Because I remember every once in a while Skipper Kelp would be there. I don't know, you remember?
Yeah, Skipper was there. He was there in the early days, and Marvin Eastman was training out of there. He was kind of like their main fight guy. Early on, I was one of the few guys down there. I rolled in once on a training trip. He was getting ready for Vitor Belfort, and I was the only guy at that weight. So basically, I got just shit beat for, 2 weeks straight. My entire training trip was basically being his training partner and getting tossed around.
So let's go back to 1999. And now I think you're still up in the boondocks there, getting your first official fights, the ones that appear on your database. Rumble at the Reservation and stuff. Do you remember that? What was the debut like?
Oh man, I'm not even sure that my very first one. I'm not even sure it shows up on there. The guy named Bruce Pack.
Okay.
And it's actually in a place called Dawson Creek, which, funny enough, is only an hour away from where I am now.
Okay.
And it was a boxing card, and they decided to host this new thing called NHB. And so they put a no holds barred fight on it. And because we were training in Prince George, and this guy was in Dawson Creek, and he was like, tough street guy. So we did the main event, and we did like a no holds barred. So it was bare knuckles, soccer kicks, knees to the head, the whole bit. But it was on a kickboxing card, in this, little hole in the wall place.
In a ring, then.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Most of I would say the first time I was in a cage when I fought Tom Sauer for I think it was IFC. That was my first time in a cage, and I'd only ever trained in a cage. Occasionally, when we go to Vegas, John finally put a cage upstairs, but a lot of times we were just on the mats because no one really had the money to have cages, and there was lots of rings around.
Did you ever run into some of the other people John floated around with? I'm not sure if I have the right era, but you ever run into Gene LaBelle?
No, never ever had the pleasure of meeting him.
Okay, and maybe the other ones are going to be the same. John Donahue, the Australian guy?
Nope.
Okay, cool. Still, when Lehman was there and those people, it's kind of like when they hit their professional stride. What about John Peretti? He used to hang out with John Lewis too.
Yeah, I think he was down in around there. There was guys like that. I remember guys like Tony DeSouza.
Okay. Great.
Right. I mean, it was like, what the hell do they call his submission?
He's a Peruvian guy.
The Peruvian necktie. I learned that from him.
Yeah.
From the Peruvian. Yeah. And another guy that was there a lot, he never really fought. His name was Harut. I forget his last name, but he was one of Gokar's guys. He would move to Vegas from Las Vegas or from LA. And he was just big Armenian leg locker, and he just messed everybody up, but he didn't care. He didn't want to fight.
Yeah, well, nice. No, definitely. Like I said, you're at the source there. So Bruce Pack, you get through that, basically TKO in a couple minutes. Then you move to West Canada's toughest. He still looked like small shows here, but Paul Trudell. What do you remember about Paul Trudell?
Well, David Lee, of course. David Lee is Roy McDonald's original coach in Kelowna. So when he first started, he started putting on these little shows, and then another fellow up there, Jason Dara, was one of the originals as well. He started putting on these little shows. So yeah, Paul Trudell was another Kelowna guy. From what I remember, he was big tough dude, juiced to the gunnels, and had a reputation for being a tough bouncer, beating the crap out of people, and so we got stuck fighting him.
Cool.
So that was fun.
I remember Jason Dara. Jason Dara was the sponsor for the Abu Dhabi trials that went down in Kelowna way back.
In Vernon.
Yeah.
It was Vernon. We were all there for that. And Jason, funny enough, he just was one of the judges, UFC Vancouver, on Saturday night.
Jason McDonald.
No, Jason Dara.
Oh, Jason. Oh, cool. Well, good for him. Good for him. That's cool.
Yeah, so Jason Dara, he was helped put on the fights in Vernon. And then Jason McDonald was down there actually competing.
Yep. Now, eventually here, you're going to fight Jason McDonald. It looks like you do one other kind of, Canada level fight, Mike Yakulik, and then Jason McDonald comes up. And I know you fought on the MFC, a Canadian show, but now it is a bigger show. McDonald, is a legit opponent. Now it's kind of a step up. What were your impressions of this fight?
Well, it was funny because, Mark Pavlich was, MFC had a couple of big shows, but this was in a little old movie theater. And it's funny because it was an abandoned movie theater. They turned it in for the fight card. but they had us, it was a nightclub. The movie theater was next door that was abandoned. That's where we were warming up. We were literally warming up on broken down cardboard boxes. So not much of a bigger show, but it was a nightclub, so it had a cool atmosphere and stuff. I was beating him in that fight, and this is back in the days when the judges, the referees, no one had a clue what they were doing, right? Like nothing. So this was back in one of those old, those double piece mouth guards with the hole in the middle. So I had one of those, and he didn't want to stand up. I didn't really want to grapple, so I knocked him down. We do the thing, I get in his guard, get out, knock him down. So I was doing great. And at one point, my mouth guard, I had him in mount, and I remember them telling us it was like, 10 unanswered blows, and I was counting to the ref. They never stopped it, but my mouth guard fell out in mount, trying to finish the fight, and they stopped the fight. Took about 2 minutes to wash out the mouth guard, put it back in me, and started standing up. So I was like, son of a bitch. Then he got a takedown, and we were in a position, and he started to work on a choke, and I swallowed the mouth guard. It got wedged in my windpipe. So as I was trying to pull the mouth guard out, he had arm triangled me and won the fight. So then I spent the next 3 years trying to get a rematch.
Yeah, that's a tough way to go. Well, would you say that was his hometown you went to?
Oh, Edmonton, yeah, that definitely. Well, he was a Red Deer guy, so Edmonton would have been the closest. I was a Prince George guy, so yeah, so it would have been as close to hometown for him because he was out of Red Deer, so a couple hours away.
And believe it or not, Canada, it's so big that it's broken up like that. So like you came with your rep from your area, like basically the toughest guy up north. McDonough probably had his rep, and then you had St. Pierre or whoever out east, and eventually Dennis Kang. But it's very much like you got your rep established beforehand. So another one of those guys that was able to compete on the next level is Nick Ring.
Oh yeah, Nick. That was Nick was an awesome one. I mean, I'm friends with all these guys because it's such a small sport. We run into each other at all these small regional cars. Like I'm heading to Lethbridge next weekend with one of the guys I'm training, a young amateur, and Lee Meehan's running that card still. Like I think he's the longest running MMA pro shit in Canada now. And Nick will probably be there. Brian Bird will be there. I mean, it's still a small world, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, Nick was a tough one.
Now, this thing says submission verbal kind of fast. What went on in that fight? Roadhouse Rumble.
Yeah, we started, and that was Lee was putting him on in a nightclub, and it was this little kind of ring that was strapped to like some posts, and he fought in the nightclub, and it was pretty ruckus. And I think Kajan had his very first fight for Lee in a Roadhouse Rumble. It was a lot of just bang 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 and real kind of fast, and we got to the ground. I got him, if I remember right, I got him in side control, and I remember Jason Dara again. He was actually cornering me because I had no one to corner me because I trained all by myself. And I remember I was in side control. I think Nick held my head down, and Jason was telling me to go knee to belly. So he meant for me to posture up, knee to belly, and strike. But I put my knee on his belly with my head trap. I got reversed, and then he pounded me out. So it was, it was like shit. But we were all still trying to figure this stuff out.
Yeah, yeah. At what point do you start to realize that you might? I don't know if you ever really could count on this to make a living, but that you would be able to compete at a higher level. Like at what point were you like looking to make the big shows?
Well, I mean, you always had those dreams, of course, but back then, I don't know, it was strange, right? You had UCC, which then became TKO. That was probably the biggest show in Canada. And then Pavlich, kind of the MFC started to, take on some bigger spots. So these were pretty big shows for us. The idea of getting to the UFC, because again, the UFC was still, it was a big show, but it was still kind of fringe. And there really wasn't a whole lot of other stuff. And there was other shows overseas you'd get into. So you'd kind of hope you were, but nobody was really making like money. So you weren't thinking, oh yeah, I'm going to get to UFC and be able to retire in 5 years. So back then, I think it was a lot more pure because there was none of those expectations. You did it purely because you loved it. And if someone gave you a 1-in-1, like 1,000 and 1,000, you were so freaking happy. It wasn't even funny. And you probably spent more down and chiropractors and massage getting ready for the fight.
Yeah, yeah, or and some guys blew all their fight money on the party afterwards. You know what I mean?
Oh hell yeah,
So,
yeah, especially when they paid you cash.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, it was. I think it was more pure because you really you did it because you loved it. You didn't do it because you thought that you were going to be on TV, or you thought that you were going to get famous, or you figured you were going to make like real money if you did well. It was kind of pure.
but at some point, you're just spending money then on training. Like when you went to John Lewis, it was on your own dime. Maybe you had some
Yep.
arrangement, and stuff like that. But it's just out of pure love then.
Oh yeah. Oh, big time. And I mean, and you worked, you hustled, right? Like, over the years, I owned a water treatment company. I had a restaurant, I mean, so you'd work, so you train maybe early in the morning, then you'd work all day, you'd train all night and repeat. And any time that you did, you took time off, you went to Vegas or wherever to train. I met Dennis at a grappling tournament, in Lethbridge. And then him and I kind of hooked up because we kind of, hit it off, and he had no one to train with. So I started going to Vancouver and training with him and Marcus Soros.
Yeah. And that's good people too, how do you feel about, did Marcus make you put the gi on and go through the jiu-jitsu training, the hard, from the very beginning, or did you get
Oh God, yeah. I hated the gi. I teach gi twice a week, and then we do MMA and no gi grappling 3 times a week. And so I'm down there every single night, but the gi was never my favorite thing. I got pictures with me and Dennis training with Marcus, as like a 0 stripe white belt. And you'd have some crazy hard rolls, but I always, even now, I try and I'm not sure whether a lot of gi training really helps your MMA career or not. I'm still not really sure, but I got a 3rd-degree black belt under Bibby, so I must spend some time in the gi.
Yeah, no, for sure. And here's the thing is, you're talking a lot of practical shit too. Hey, you're teaching it now, so you're helping others, but you're also able to make a living because of it. So maybe it doesn't help in the fights, but you're putting it all together, man. You know what I mean?
A little bit. Like with me, it was never ever a living. Like, I mean, even now, I have a job and I go down there and I spend all my free time at the gym for free. Like I don't charge. All my guys get my time for nothing. I'm still doing it for the love of it.
That's cool.
It's one of those things. It was never really something that you were able to like really monetize. When Bodog came along, you got a couple good paydays, but that was short-lived, unfortunately. And but it was always for the love.
We'll get there. Yeah, and I pegged you that way. I figured that's the way it was going to be with you. That you took care of your stuff, but that you weren't going to be able to let the sport go by.
Even now, God, like I'm so broken. But I'm like today, we do holy rollers on Sunday, so I'm down there rolling with all the young guys, and my back's going to hurt like for the next 3 days straight because a lot of these young guys are, they're tough.
Yeah, big, young bodies. You're not the same anymore,
No,
so,
God, no.
So we're getting into the mid part of 2002, and now you do a series of fights. It looks like in the Canada area. Cameron Brown, Chris Peak, Kevin Dolan, and now this is where you're building up wins and stuff, maybe picking up steam. Talk about your mindset here, where you're training, how things are going.
And again, I was making lots of trips. We'd go down to Vegas to train, but I was spending, time with Dennis down in Vancouver. And it was funny because we were trying to figure stuff out back then. Like there was no, you couldn't go somewhere and say, okay, what does an MMA training camp look like? Like, how do people do this stuff? Like there just wasn't there. I think I was one of the very first people ever to use an IV in Canada. Because I heard it from Tito in Vegas, right?
Okay.
Yeah. So we were just making it up. So Dennis and I were training. We were doing stuff with Marcus, but we're like, okay, we need other stuff. So we rounded up Tony Pap for boxing. We rounded up a wrestling coach in Ikungala. And we started, bringing that together and making like an actual training camp where you were doing, jujitsu, you were doing nogi jujitsu, boxing, you were doing wrestling, and you were trying to put it all together. But there was nothing. There was nothing in Vancouver that did it all. It was just us. And then the guys who were kind of coming around us and other guys who might want to fight.
Yeah, how did you brought in Bibiano? That's where Bibiano Fernandez eventually popped up, who became a champion at one, and obviously, honored you with his black belt. Talk about meeting him.
Yeah, Bibby. What we started. So you'd have to fast forward a fair bit to get to the Bibby part, because Bibby there. Oh God, it would have been a number of years. Like, I'm not sure if Bibby was pre-fighting for us or post. I'm kind of thinking he might have been post fighting for us. And because we were training ourselves, me and Dennis, and there wasn't a whole lot going on, right? For other people. And then they started, getting a little more, and Revolution kind of started. And Revolution started as a little bit of a hole in the wall, just a tight crew. You remember Lance Gibson? He's still got his son fights in Bellator, just an awesome fighter. Gibson kind of had, Franco Gibson Pancration, Chris Franco. They were in there starting to go. This Revolution started, so we kind of started training over there. And then Rob, you remember Rob?
Kamek, correct me his last name. Belly, that's it. Yep.
Yeah, so he got involved with the Revolution and stuff, and then kind of around that time, then Bibby came in. He came to Canada with a Canadian girl who was a black belt that he married, came to Canada, they split up, and then Bibby ended up with us. And so he started training at the Fortress. So this was a little further on, probably post UFC. So post 2005. So I started going down there maybe 2005 or 6. And then I ended up going down there and kind of like, helping to run the gym and training down there. And that's how I ended up making my move down there, which was probably, 2008-ish.
Okay. Now,
yeah.
Okay, so we did skip around, and that's my fault. So now we're in the 2003, 2000. The MFC is getting bigger here. You're starting to fight there. MFC 6, MFC 7. By MFC 7, you do finally get your Jason McDonald rematch. Why don't you talk about the progression of MFC and getting your rematch?
Yeah, it was kind of one of those ones where I was harping on it. I was harping on it for a long time with Pavlis, trying to get this thing, and it was just was one of those ones where, and I'm a big believer of the same thing as Jason. Like, once you beat a guy, why the hell go back, right? All you're doing is risking losing the win. But Pavlich made the fight, and it was a tiny little card up at a place called Slave Lake. Like, it's even north of where I am now. And he decided to put a card on there. And they had a tragedy right before the event. I think a bunch of youth ended up in a car accident. Something happened. And the community was just, so the card had nobody. It was literally, nobody came to this thing. And I think I had, back in that day, we still had the PG Fight Club. And I think I had 4 or 5 guys on that card. So I cornered 4 or 5 guys and then fought Jason in the main event. Yeah. And funny story, because somewhere in there, Travis Galbraith, you might remember him. He was one of my guys, fought in Pride. Travis was fighting a guy, and they had something happened. It turned into a bit of a brawl. So everybody was fighting cage side, like we're fighting in and out of it was a ring, in and out of the ring. I got detained by the police. So they held me outside of the building, and they literally walked me in for the main event. Yeah, it was hilarious.
I think we mentioned at the beginning of this that it was a little rough in North Canada sometimes, huh?
Oh yeah, it was fun. It was fun. I mean, some of the fight cards we put on, the stuff that would go on in the crowd, it's hilarious. But yeah, no, it was, and I was the guy breaking the fights up, but I got pulled out, and then they kept me outside the venue. They wouldn't want me back in, but they walked me back in just for the main event.
Yeah, that's not
But
exactly
yeah,
optimal.
I KO'd his ass that time.
Now, let me just get my timing here correctly. So now, how does it feel to you? You know, you got the win in the most recent fight with McDonald, and kind of shortly after that, McDonald got his UFC run, maybe a few years later, but like he got a UFC run that was considerably longer. Did you ever, are you friends with Jason, or do you hold that against him, or how do you
Oh
feel?
no, no. I mean, Jason and I, after fighting, we were fine. I mean, going in, there was a little bit of beef because they were Red Deer guys and we were Prince George guys, and there was always this little, Alberta, British Columbia kind of thing, and there was a lot of guys fighting one another on small regional cards, so you'd always be bumping in. So there was always a little bit, but no. By the time we were doing the Abu Dhabi thing, me, Dennis, and Jace would train together. So yeah, no, Jace is a really good guy. And no, no, not, I never held anything against anybody I fought.
Well,
No, it was good.
but when you watched him in UFC, were you at that point was everything cool, or were you kind
Oh
of
yeah, oh heck
okay?
yeah, you betcha. And I mean, the thing is, I had my shot in the UFC, and I lost the fight, but I think my greatest regret was not really pursuing another fight. Like I think I went in there, I lost the fight. I was kind of bummed out about losing the fight, and maybe I had these ideas. Oh, maybe I don't belong there. Well, which is bullshit because I beat a guy who had an 8 or 9 fight streak. Yeah, but I didn't really pursue it. I didn't chase it. Right. I wasn't one of those ones that I lost the fight and then I got back in the day, it would have been Joe on the phone, every second day badgering him for a fight. And that's probably one of my greatest regrets in the sport is not pushing for another shot.
Yeah, you almost got there kind of too early too. UFC 53, Zoof is there, and they've done the 10th anniversary show, but they've really only had the show for about a couple years. So they're not the powerhouse they are now. You know what I mean? And
No, no. But it almost makes it easier because there's fewer guys, right? I mean, there wasn't many Canadians, so they want a Canadian. It was only a handful of guys.
yeah, and they stuck you in with Forrest Griffin, who at that point was the guy who had cut his teeth with the UFC, and he was one of their stars. Talk about the whole build up to the fight, how it came about, and everything.
Well, it was kind of funny because Dennis and I were down training with Layman at Cobra Kai, and we were down there, and Dana came in, and they were going to do a pilot for this new idea that they had for this Ultimate Fighting TV show. But they needed a bunch of guys to help trying to film this pilot because they were trying to sell this pilot. So he rolled in. He was looking for people. He knew me and Kang because they'd been looking at us. So they brought us in along with a bunch of the guys who ended up being the first cast. It was Bobby Southworth, Koscheck, Sam Hogar. But I mean, John was friends with Lorenzo's and he was doing personal training for them and with Dana. So it was a pretty small circle in Vegas, right? So they all came into JSAC and they're looking to do this pilot. So we all got kind of co-opted into doing this pilot. So they had Dennis out doing wind sprints out in the freaking Red Rock Canyon in the desert, and I was doing stuff, and they had us rolling around doing all this. So then I got told I was going to be on the season. Sat in Dana's office, had a contract, like the whole bit. And then somewhere along the lines of me going home and waiting on getting called, they chose what the hell was the Canadian? The guy who Chris Lieben peed in his bed. Horrible guy who had no record whatsoever. They picked him as the Canadian. And I
Yeah,
think in hindsight, it was because they didn't want a Canadian having even a remote chance of winning the show. So I think they like they needed an American to win, which they probably did, right? So I think it was almost kind of one of those, we kind of screwed you over a little bit. So his first fight after winning the show, they picked me. So
yeah.
yeah.
Hold on one second. I'm looking up the Canadian's name because I do want to ask you about that because how did that sit with everybody in Canada, kind of thing? Because I mean,
No, it's
uh,
horrible. Everybody here hated it. Like, I mean, Dennis and I ran into him on the plane back to Vegas training, and we got talking. And it was one of these things where, when you run into guys, oh yeah, I'm going down for the show, and we're like, oh okay, blah blah blah. Where you train? And it was like some nowhere place that we know where it is, but there's nobody there. And okay, well, how many fights do you have? The guy says, well, I think it's 5 or 6. We're like 5 or 6, okay. So obviously you're full of shit because you don't have 5 or 6 fights, right?
Yeah.
You remember all of your fights. And now if you're Dennis and I'm like, you got 50 or 51, okay, maybe, or but me, you got 30 fights. Okay, you might be off by one, but 5 or 6, you're not a hope, right? So this
Yeah.
guy never did anything.
Jason Thacker is his name.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Now it's
yeah.
kind of what did you see? Did you feel at that point a little used? Because I
Oh,
mean,
hell yeah.
see a lot of people that they kind of teased and stuff, and then they do something like this, which really to me is inserting that TV production thing. They, like you said, they decided either they didn't want him to look good for Canada, or I think part of it too is that moment where Couture sits him down. Couture came out a star from season 1. He was going to go on to Hollywood stardom, and Couture had that sit down with him. Are you sure you want to do this? And sends him home without a fight. So, I think it also helped. That was the only really useful thing. And I've heard that Thacker's like not, doing well, like psychologically, that really took its toll on him, and that he's kind of a recluse. And what do you think of all that? Well, there's so many good pro fighters up there. Why do that? It's disgusting.
I know, and that's the only thing I can ever think of, that it was something to do with the fact that if you threw even a bit of a long shot Canadian, but if you threw someone in there who had that bit of potential, and a Canadian won the show, maybe it wouldn't have gone on to do what it did. Then I think part of the reason why at that point I got that fight is because Bonner and Griffin just was such a barn burner, slugger fest, right? And at that point, I had all 15 of my fights were wins by knockout. And I had a reputation of being tough. And I think what they were hoping is they'd get another Bonner Griffin type of fight where a couple, big knuckle draggers would go in there and beat the crap out of one another. And in talking to, Forrest afterwards, he's like, yeah, hell no. That thing hurt for months. And so basically we went in and he took me down and got my back. So now that was history. But he was like, yeah, that's a great idea and all, but done there, done that, screw that, right?
Yeah. I don't want to get his name wrong, but one of the Jason Knight, the bare knuckle kid who did a bunch of UFC fights too. But Jason Knight said about his fight with Artem Lobov, everybody should have one of those fights. Like Bonner, Forrest Griffin. You should have one of those fights, but you don't want to string a bunch of them together either, so you got to give Forrest some credit.
Oh yeah. I had one of those with a guy named Cameron Brown, and we fought twice, and both of them were just like the first one, they dragged him off to the hospital. It was a draw. And I basically didn't even make it back to Prince George. I had to stop at a buddy's house and pass out for 24 hours because I was just beating the crap. Yeah, and then we fought a second time and I beat him. But yeah, that was my kind of Bonner Griffin moment, was just one of those kinds of fights. Not a lot of skill back then, but a lot of tough people.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's where you start getting that reputation. You like you said, you had 15 and with the KOs and stuff. You mentioned boxing. I wanted to ask you, you came down to Bodog with a big guy named Todd. Is it Todd Gowenberg?
Yeah, Todd.
I think Todd was his first name. Yeah, Todd. And at some point, I think it was Costa Rica, you guys unveiled one of his boxing coaches, and this fellow was like 90 years old. Why don't you fill me in on that story? Because you want to talk about a boxing character. This guy had it in spades. It's practically Jimmy McLaren in there.
Oh God, yeah, old Roy. He was an British amateur boxing guy who'd been around Vancouver forever, and Todd wanted to tidy up his hands, so he started working with Roy. And Roy at the time was in his 80s, like mid 80s kind of thing, and he'd wear this tiny little chest protector. And Roy was a little guy, right? And Todd's a big, strong dude, and Todd would smash that guy to the body with that tiny little chest protector, and Roy would be like, "Come on, hit it harder." And he was deaf, a little senile, but he was hilarious. Yeah, Roy. Todd loved using him. I never really worked with the guy, but Todd liked him.
Yeah, it's interesting. He was a guy that embodied that he's got to have forgotten more about boxing than I'll ever know. That we'll ever know and stuff, because he was crusty. He was crusty in the corner. He had the voice, the whole thing. So even in his 80s, he's still carried himself like a coach, man. He was an impressive dude.
Oh yeah, he was like the old guy in Rocky.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. What happened to Todd? Let's talk a little bit about Todd.
He went on and fought. He fought Little Nog in a card in in Calgary, and actually probably won him the first round, and then kind of gassed out and ended up. I think he got submitted in the second, but I mean, that was kind of the peak that he went. Had some good TKO fights and stuff. Todd's no longer with us. He actually passed, unfortunately.
Oh, man, that's a
Yeah,
shame.
yeah.
He's a big guy, and I remember he's a big, kind of quiet, but he was a social dude. We were kind of quarantined when we did that shooting Bodog. We'll come back to that in a bit. Well, when we were down there, and he was getting antsy, Tom Sauer, now this is IFC in Boise, so you're crossing the border. I mean, I imagine you're driving.
Oh god, from Prince George, we're talking 17 hours each way.
Yeah. So you still love the sport, huh?
Oh yeah, they're at least paying for gas.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. So, and Sauer, they're not exactly doing you any favors. A real veteran, a guy like yourself that has shown up, doesn't know what he's getting into, but isn't scared at all. So, how was the fight? How did it go down? And did you get to meet Tom?
Well, it was my first cage, so it was funny. So we rolled in, and they had what was one of their very original commentators for UFC? The big wrestler, big white guy. Yeah, so he was the color guy. So he was doing all our interviews and all that stuff. So we got there, and I cut weight during the whole drive. I get down there, I make my 205 on the button, and Tom comes in 17 pounds over. So they're plotting like, okay, so obviously this fight's off, and I'm like, well, I'm not freaking driving 17 hours and going home without a paycheck. So, give me some extra money and I'll fight him. So we fought him, and Tom's a super nice guy, and he had Tourette's, so it's all sorts of funny stuff came out of that guy's mouth. Like It was hilarious. Like even during the fight, and he had Jeremy Horn and Matt Hughes in his corner. Yeah, so there was one point he had me jammed up against the fence, was pounding on me, and I reached up over my shoulder to see the two of them because we're right in the corner. I go, "Hey man, can I get an autograph after the fight?" And they couldn't believe it because it was Matt Hughes, for God's sakes.
That's cool. That's cool. Tommy Sauer's no longer with us either.
Yeah. No.
So that's one of the sad parts about doing this job, kind of thing, where I'm glad I'm catching everybody I can, because some of the people, Stefan Bonner, who we mentioned here, that's three.
Yeah,
that's a little for me. You know what I mean? So, yeah, rest in peace, Tommy. I can tell you a funny Tom Sauer story because of his Tourette's. He was fighting, and Maurice Smith was in the back, and unfortunately, one of his Tourette's trigger was a racial term.
I know. I was there when Maurice walked into this card and it had the same thing.
And I don't know if it was before or after, but this other one, when he saw Maurice and he knew what it would do to him, he took the shorts he was going to wear and he just stuffed them in his mouth. He was walking around with shorts in his mouth. Yep. Just a ridiculous story. Another time in Holland, Tommy was an EMT. He was all cut up. The doctors bailed because he was the last fight, and they went looking for the doctors, and the guys had all left. So he pulled out his stitch kit and stitched himself up in the mirror.
Yeah.
A couple of rest in peace stories there for the old school guys, Bill.
Yeah.
So now IFC, though, this is Boise. Is this still the original IFC show with they did the big tournament with Horn and everything, and Babalu won? That's beginning to fit.
Original IFC. What the hell was the guy's name? I forget him, but anyway, original IFC promoter. It wasn't a tournament; it was just single fight format. But I am not mistaken, on that card, I think they also had a 4-man tournament.
Okay,
and it might have even been that card where Horn was in. No, Horn was cornering, so he couldn't have been fighting. But anyway, yeah, they were still doing tournaments as part of the card.
Did you get paid? Did you have any problems getting paid or anything like that?
Oh, no, I got paid with those guys. I mean, at that point in time, I was kind of one of those, don't give me a check. I don't want, I would just give me cash. All right.
Okay.
Give me cash now. I'm not leaving till I get cash.
Yeah, small
Yeah.
amount of money, at that point, it's kind of the easiest way to do business at that point. Not to mention
Oh,
in Canada, depending on who you hang out with and stuff, like biker groups and stuff are kind of like, good to have on your side, the sponsors and stuff, and they're
oh
gonna
yeah.
give you, so now here it looks like you get the call from TKO for the first time, and you're heading out to Montreal. You that had Horn and Loazo in the main event. In this one here, you fight Jan Pellerin. What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, we were going out to Quebec a fair bit because it was funny because there wasn't so many fight promotions, there wasn't so many fight gyms. So Stephan Patry, who was TKO, UCC before that, he was bringing out a lot of BC boys. So a lot of times that's how I got to meet Todd. Todd originally trained with Lance Gibson, and
Okay.
they'd bring Lance Gibson guys, and they'd bring out some of us, and we'd almost always end up on the same flights. And of course, we're the only Anglophones in Quebec, so we're always hanging out together. We'd always be in the same change rooms and stuff because, of course, they put all the Francophones in one dressing room and they put all the Anglophones in another. And they generally were trying to match them in a way that you were fighting uphill. Like they weren't giving you any real favorable matchups. And Yan was, supposed to be the next big thing coming out of Quebec and stuff. So they stuck us in there to fight. And I mean, it was a good fight. I think I TKO'd him.
Yeah, yeah. Now this looks like this is cool. It looks like you're about to take your first flight for a fight, and it's all the way to Australia, and it's the fight
Well,
a guy.
we're flying to Quebec all the time because I mean that's a 5-hour flight. Canada's big.
Yeah, but Australia is a different type of flight. It's a really long flight, and how'd that go? Because that's Chris Hazeman, a real veteran, and Australia can be an interesting place to be a foreigner in. What can you tell us about that trip?
It was an awesome one. It was the only trip I ever brought my wife along, and because it was Australia, and we made a deal where they'd fly us out a week ahead, and they accommodated us, kept us a week with accommodation, and so we got a bit of a holiday out of it too. Chris Peak was the other guy, so we cornered one another. So that was kind of the deal. We wouldn't bring out any cornermen. And yeah, I got Hazeman, and I mean, I believe they brought me out hoping that Chris was going to be resurrecting his career and all this kind of stuff. And again, it was in a big nightclub. And I remember that Chris was the strength and conditioning coach for some kind of, I think it was, we were in on the hell do they call it? The South Coast, just outside of Gold Coast. The Gold Coast just outside of Brisbane, and he was the strength and conditioning coach for some Brisbane Aussie rules team. So I remember the entire first 2 rows was nothing but these big, giant, no-neck Australian rugby players. And we started to fight, and he'd got me in a couple bad spots, but it was mostly my fight. Like I beat the crap out of him in that fight and bad. But during the fight, the announcers on there, come on, get behind your local boy, and their announcers actually helping the crowd cheer for their local boy. And and when I TKO'd him, his dad threw the towel over his face because we were right in the corner, and I got him out and was finishing him. And they weren't going to throw the towel in this because poor guy's going to die. And when it got all done, all the Aussie rules guys were getting up and coming to the cage, and it was a ring, coming to the ring, and I'm thinking, oh Christ, we're gonna die. Like these guys are gonna, and they didn't. But it was funny. He turned out to be another really great guy, but he wasn't doing so good after that fight.
Yeah, he was older towards the end of his career there, and but he's a real pioneer. And he's one of the few Australian guys I ever met who doesn't really drink.
Yeah.
So Australia is a nice trip. Now you went to UFC, you got to Australia. How come you're not following up with something with stringing together big stuff? What's holding you back here?
There just wasn't a whole lot of stuff. I mean, really, the Australian thing was kind of cool. How exactly it came about, I think there was a guy, his name was Terry. I forget. Anyway, he was a kind of a promoter / club promoter / had a gym and such. And I think he just, saw me online, was looking for someone to fight Chris. So it just kind of came about. And it was one of those phone calls where like, you want to come to Australia to fight? And it's like, sure. And you're kind of thinking, yeah, I'll get happy when I see the plane tickets.
Yeah.
But they took such good care of us, and everything they said, they did. It was a great experience, but there just wasn't a lot of it. There just wasn't. Like, you were fighting in Quebec, you were fighting in Edmonton for Pavlich. There was nothing going on in BC. I mean, pro MMA was banned. Ontario pro MMA was banned. So there wasn't a whole lot of stuff going on in Canada, except, smaller regional shows. And there wasn't a ton of overseas stuff. And the stuff that they did have, they didn't want to float a big plane ticket to get some foreigner come out.
Yep. Now, let me ask you here. Now you kind of run into a little bit of a rough spot in the career here. You get a 3-fight losing streak. We talked about the Forrest Griffin fight that's in between here, but that's sandwiched with a loss to Patrick Cote, another Canadian guy with a rep from the East Coast, and Tim McKenzie, who I think is a Arizona fighter that comes with a pedigree from a good school down there.
Yeah, he was Raleigh guys, Todd and the twins.
Trevor, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so talk about that run where, at the end of that, you kind of got to be thinking, hang it up or, start taking it more seriously. How did that go for you? How did you assimilate 3 losses? Because you had a great winning streak. You're used to winning, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, I was doing it because I loved it. There wasn't really that crazy, oh, you're going to make a ton of money. I mean, I got more from Sprawl from my short sponsorship than I got paid to fight Forrest. So, it was just the way it was. So no one was thinking, and I had a business and understand what money is. So there was nothing in there where you're thinking, oh, okay, well, I'm gonna get on a winning streak and make some bank. No, you did it because you loved it. I just loved fighting. I loved training. I loved the camaraderie with the guys and all of that. And you got to remember too, because there was no coaches, the day I started training, I also started coaching. So I'd go down to Vegas, learn stuff, come back, and I was teaching a club, right? So, on the side, I was running a gym, training, fighting, but also, trying to work. So, So you were always coaching. You were doing it because you loved it, and there wasn't the money. So I don't think there was ever really a whole ton of, I'm going to fold it up type of thing. Not quite yet at that point anyway.
Yeah, now let me ask you now, did you ever turn, and I know Bill Mahood isn't a guy who's going to turn down a fight because he's afraid or anything like that, but did you ever turn it down because it just made no sense? You couldn't take a week off work or, whatever, like anything like that, real life stuff?
Only once, and it was funny because I had kind of already was done, and I'd done a pro boxing match, and I had a detached retinal surgery, and so I was just getting over that. And I remember I got a call. I forget who the hell it was, but someone got a hold of me, and they wanted me to fight in Russia again, and they were going to pay me. I think it was like 15 grand cash, and I'm like, okay. So what's this guy? So I'm like sure dogging him while we're on the thing, and he's like 12-0 with 12 head kick KOs, and I'm like, yeah, fuck no, I'm not going to Russia to have some giant freaking Russian dude kick my head into the 3rd row, right? To hell with that. So yeah, I turned that sucker down.
Okay.
50 grand would have been nice, but over in Russia, I'm not quite sure how the healthcare would have been back in the day, but yeah.
And no, we went there together for Bodog. We'll get there in a minute here. We're cruising. So after what happened with McKenzie? He just caught you?
Yeah, pretty much. It was he just caught me, and he caught me good. And then, of course, it was kind of like that Hendo Bisbing thing, right? He caught me, put me down, and then he followed up with a hammer fist from hell. Yeah, that was a good one. I still don't remember. I remember getting paid, and I remember getting to the arena, and nothing in between. That stuff's gone.
And then we would see McKenzie in the Bodog roster as well before moving on. So let's see here.
Brother who I fought.
At that point here, you go back. Todd Saylor, Shane Lytle, King of the Cage, and then you work back up to a Patrick Cote rematch. How how was that series of fights? This is 2005, entering 2006. Because after that Cote rematch is when we get to Bodog.
Yeah, so I mean, I just fights they just happen. I mean, a lot of them are like David Lee was doing another promotion in Vancouver, so he was doing one down there and won a bunch of local guys, and so you just go and do the fights, and it's funny because every one of them has their own little story. There was the one, the hell was the guy's name? Might have been Lytle. He was big, mean, tough looking dude, and I had a really badly broken rib going into the fight where I had it broken by a pro boxer I was trying to help out, and the fight card was falling apart, and it was a friend of ours doing it, and we were down to like it was um Caleb Starnes was the main event versus someone, and then me versus this other guy. And there was only like 3 other fights in the card. So the commission was going to cancel it anything less than 5. So for me to pull out, the card would have been done. So I just basically popped a whole bunch of perks and went and had a fight. And a good thing I got the guy submitted right away. But yeah, it hurt.
Yeah, interestingly enough, the show was called Wild West.
Oh, yeah, it's definitely the Wild West.
So Bodog comes along. Now Bodog at that point was trying to get an international roster going on, and as a Canadian, obviously you're near the top of the list. You went down, I think. Was your first Bodog experience in Costa Rica or Russia? Russia.
Yeah, I didn't fight in Costa Rica. I was just there cornering. My 2 fights were the Russian. So that was the Russian series that they had. I forget what the hell they called it. Yeah, so it was a bit of a tournament. So I think I fought an Arab guy and then fought Steve. He was another lolly guy.
Yeah, Steve Steinbeis.
Yeah,
Well,
Steinbeis. Yeah.
So let's go through. So first, you did come down to Costa Rica, and that was the long 2-week shoot for 3 days of fights that Gallenberg and you had a couple other guys involved in that show.
Yeah.
Talk about that whole experience, because I know it was fun and stuff, but is it taxing on a fighter to have so long? It really is. Talk about it, because I remember later. The reason I bring it up is I remember later because we talked about Rob Velick, and you guys were ahead of the curve in professionalism. You guys came up to me as the matchmaker. You were like, "Look, we're sitting down figuring it out with a calculator. Once we get to nutritionists and the level that everybody needs to be at, we need to make X amount of money for." So was that worth it? Was a big trip worth it for you, or was it just fun?
Well, I mean, a little bit of both, right? So I think Todd and Tyler fought on that card. I think Coulter might even fought on that card. But I mean, again, you're 2 weeks in Costa Rica. I mean, they took an entire resort over. I mean, so it was a hell of an experience. Plus, you had a whole bunch of people you knew. I mean, like Pickett was there, Kang was there, Josh Burnett, like all these guys are there, and I mean, they're all coaching. I'm coaching, so it's not like you're holding 2 weeks of weight discipline and training discipline. You're helping your guys. You're training twice a day, but other than that, you're in Costa Rica. So you do your an hour and a half in the morning, you do your hour and a half at night. Even that, the guys are, they're just tailing their training camps into getting ready to fight. So it's not even like hard training. It was just a great experience. And I mean, the Bodog guys were awesome. We were involved with Bodog since before it became Bodog, right? But like at the very beginning, they were going to call it Ship of Doom, and it was going to be a TV show. I don't know if you remember all that way back in the day. Greg Allen was dating Biff Naked. Biff Naked was a artist signed with Bodog Music, and they noticed that when they advertised during the UFC, they had really good results. So they start talking about doing something to do with mixed martial arts. And Biff introduced, I think it was Peter, was the guy who was the head of Canada, to Greg, and Greg's like, blah blah blah. So one of the original things was go travel around and do this TV show where you show all these people training. Yeah. So I mean, Bodog from like the get-go was a Vancouver, the MMA part of it was very Vancouver. The Canadian guys were kind of involved, and so we got to see it right from the start to the finish.
Yeah,
I still have Bodog gloves in my basement.
That's cool.
Like
Peter
from when they bought out the leftover stock.
Yeah, cool. No, I ran into a guy that had a collection that he had bought like some stock, and I gave my girlfriend, my wife now, my ex fiance, right? The old Bulldog outfit that the women used to wear because they had models and great clothes for women. So she was
Yeah,
like out of it had bell bottom sweats. She couldn't believe it. She
yeah.
was so happy. So that's
Bodog
cool.
was awesome.
Here's the thing about what the stuff you mentioned. It was a music and fight company, and that was a little bit of a problem. Peter Carroll was, I did a little research. There was a band that was kind of like that big in Canada thing, so him and his brothers were the Carroll brothers, which had their moment, in the charts at some point. And he also played bass on one of Biff Naked's kind of punk rock albums.
Oh, I
So
never knew.
yeah, so he was straight from the music business, and I think that at some point mixing the two is not a good idea. If you're clicking on all cylinders for a fight audience, then your fight audience has a wide range of music taste because it has nothing to do with this. So if
Yeah,
you're piling one kind of music on, you're going to turn off a lot of audience if you're mixing them. So at any rate, a little bit of the politics. I believe it was Greg Allen that eventually went out to find a fight company that they would sign the contract with, and he came across me and us in New Jersey, and that's where my boss Vlad signed the contract with Bodog, and then
yeah.
we went to Costa Rica for the first time. You actually you signed up to fight with Bodog. The next trip was to Russia. Now I remember in this one that you're um like a guy, you did a bunch of research, like, and it was like a world renowned tattoo artist that you kind of set up, and you got a big old leg dragon tattoo stuff. Talk about that whole trip and how it all came about, because I know too, a shout out to the boys that was kind of like some biker connections, like Russian biker groups sent you to the talk about it. You tell me, clean up my story, buddy.
Well, I mean, yeah, it was just kind of one of those things. Like I already had I've got a 6-foot tattoo of a dragon that runs from my shoulder all the way down my back to my leg. So, we're going to Russia, and I'm thinking to myself, there was, I don't know how I heard about the guy, but there was a fairly, renowned tattoo guy that specialized in dragons, Russian dragons, and that kind of thing. So kind of looked him up, and I was going to go get it done anyway, but was mentioning to whoever the producers were at the time, saying, listen, I'm going to need probably 3, 4, 5 hours after I fight on day 1 before they want me back to day 2. You're supposed to go and be a spectator, because they had that in that small sound stage. So we're fighting in a sound stage that made it look like a Russian palace. So it's super cool. So, but I need to get to this guy. I need a ride. I need someone to navigate. I need the interpreter to come and help it out. And I'd already phoned this guy, and they're like, well, if you let us film it, we'll pay for the tattoo. I'm like, oh shit, okay. So I've never seen they filmed it, and it was like 6 hours of hell because it was all on my shin. But there's film of that somewhere.
Well, I'm not sure if that aired on the television show or not, but I do remember them sending a
No,
crew
it
with.
never aired. Never aired. I always wondered where the film went, because it'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, that would be something for the archives for sure, and it's kind of more interesting than the fight. But you got a W. Talk about the fight.
Yeah, he was a big Arab guy, and I believe he was like a strength and conditioning coach for. I think it was like Team Nagara had somebody in Dubai or Abu Dhabi or something like that. And I remember going, shaking his hand. It was one of those like, holy smacks, this guy's got mitts on him and he's got muscles everywhere. And like, wow. And yeah, so I managed to, basically knee him in his guts a whole lot, got on top of him. I actually finished him with a liver shot from the guard. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Made some funny noise, and I hit it 3 or 4 times, and the fight was over. So yeah, it was pretty good. It was cool. And I believe on that same card, Fedor's brother fought.
Yeah. There were a few. That was 2 nights of fights, like you said.
Yeah.
And just to go over, so the sound studio was actually. So this is how Bulldog rolled. We rented a 20,000 seat arena.
Olympic arena.
And then used giant pictures of what a palace wall would look like, and put pictures up on all fours, hanging from the roof, giant pictures of them. And what you see there is completely, photos. It's not even a real palace or anything like that. But they made it look good. And when you're watching stuff like that, I remember you walk out of that room and then you're in a stadium with it's an empty, lit 20,000 seat stadium. There's rows of seats and material, for building whatever stage or whatever on the floor everywhere and stuff like that. Actually, kind of crazy.
It was super crazy, but whoever come up with that, it was a great idea, but they never thought of the fighters, because we'd be outside trying to warm up. And some guy with the tech guys would run up and go, everybody quiet, they're going to film. So everyone would have to stop warming up, and you couldn't talk. You'd all sit there and let them film the fight. And then you start warming up again. And then they'd be like, oh, we got to do a sound check. Everyone be quiet. So you'd have to stop warming up. Then you start again. Then you stop again. It was a nightmare, but it was fun.
Yeah, I realized that. Do you remember the party afterwards? Did you go to the boat?
No, actually, it was funny because I did the tattoo. And like I said, I got 6 hours straight of this guy pounding ink into me. So I wasn't feeling hot. I was obligated to go back and do that night of fights because they had to have everyone there. So then we all went back to the hotel and we had like a 4 a.m. flight call, right? And I'm like, you know what, guys? I've been to lots of after parties. I'm going to bed because this is ridiculous. So I went to bed. I got up and I'm sitting in the lobby at, I don't know, 15 minutes before I was supposed to, and no one is back yet. And then the bus rolls up and it disgorges 100 drunken people from this bus. And these people are in no state to get on a plane, but it's Russia. So they all basically got their stuff, got back on another bus and off to the airport. We went, man, how some of those people got through security and customs. And again, the States, you would have been denied boarding, like half of them.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think they just at some point wanted people, away.
And then I heard the stories. I heard stories for like 10 years about that after party, and I slept through it.
Yeah, that's like you said, you've been enough. You got your experience. It's okay. It was a hell of an after fight party, but you remind me, the scene at the airport was actually almost more fun and funny. You know what I mean? Because
Dude, it was hilarious. Like George Masvidal was with us, kind of behind us. Yeah. He was passed out on his bag, sleeping in the lineup, and his coaches would basically just drag him forward 3 feet when the line would move, drag him forward 3 feet when the line would move. He slept through the whole thing.
It's
like how they checked him in or got him through security, I have no idea.
He actually he knocked out a Russian dude that outside of the boat. The Russian dude kind of backhanded his girlfriend, and he knocked him out. And there was a moment there where people had to straighten out who he was and who he was with. But he instinctually almost got into a bad moment with the Russian guys. So. Huh?
3-piece and a soda.
Yeah, exactly. It was I don't even think it lasted 3 pieces on that day. I think it was the extra one shot. So now you went back to Russia twice to fight. That's what's going on here.
So I won the first one, and then it was like a tournament. So then I got to fight Steve for the finals, and that was when Putin came, and that was my kind of like 6 degrees of separation. Putin came to the fight. Lindland fought Fedor for the main event. We were right near the top of the card, and then we were still sweaty and bleedy, and the Russian Secret Service came and loaded us on a bus and took us to some winter palace to go have drinks with Putin.
Oh, that's cool. So you actually went to drinks with Putin.
Oh yeah. It was bizarre because it was him, right? It was Putin and Jean-Claude Van Damme. And then all the fighters, and Jean-Claude was making toasts about, all of us fighters and living the fighter life and stuff. And oh yeah, it was surreal. And most of us were still in fight shorts and stunk like sweat. And Julia Kenzie, she was with us, and she's got a hell of a story because I think she had an accident in her pants during that fight, never got to change. So she was sitting in with Putin with, yeah.
Yeah,
so people don't believe the stories. And then one of my it's my brown belts. He's like, "Holy shit! I saw her on a podcast. She was telling this story, so you weren't lying."
No, it was it was crazy. I mean, when you're dealing with a guy like that, and now he's even become more complicated, but it was very complicated. Security in the building, and like you said, you get whisked off. Nobody was thinking, oh, the guys are going to need a minute to shower and stuff, and there you are sitting there. So what did you eat? What did he serve
Uh,
you?
it was just kind of like little aperitifs kind of thing, and cocktails, like little shots, and like you could have coffee, like little espressos and little aperitifs, and that was it. A bunch of pictures, and then of course it was um, the Bodog owner, and then your boss, right? And
Yeah,
those guys were there, and oh yeah, it was pretty cool.
yeah. There's a funny story behind that where Nick Thompson beat Eddie Alvarez that show, and
Right, I remember that.
so
Nick,
Putin, they wanted to invite Nick to that party where everybody would eat at Putin, and Nick basically blew Putin off.
oh, wow.
He's like, I want to go with my friends, and he snuck on the other bus and didn't go. So shot of a lifetime, and he blew it.
Yeah, that's too bad. It was cool.
What do you remember about Steinbeiss? Because Steinbeiss is another one. This is another one of your opponents where, later on, I think he winds up in the UFC and has a little run, and with his kickboxing and stuff, a dangerous guy. Now, here's a guy that, you come with your boxing. Here's a guy who was primarily a stand-up guy. Another one where the promoters may have expected a slugfest. What went on in this one?
Yeah, I think he was a K1 guy, and he was big dude, and I remember sitting in the corner, and I think it was Paul Lazenby was commentating with that was his name. He used to
Jeff.
comment with like Ali fights and stuff, and they were
Oh,
talking about. I remember leaning over the corner. Oh hell no, I'm not too old for this, and I actually I took him down a whole bunch. I beat him up, but the problem with that one was I like elbows from the top. We weren't allowed to elbow, right? Bodog, you couldn't elbow in the face. So it really hampered. So that thing took the entire 3 rounds and ended up being a decision. But I had him down, grinding on him. I actually pulled off a cartwheel guard pass in that fight.
cool. Yeah. Is that, you mentioned the elbows? This is a good time to bring it up. Is that where the nickname comes from, the Butcher?
Yeah, no. It's a funnier story than that. It's got really not a lot to do with fighting. But yeah. Yeah, no, myself. But yeah, no, it was Marcus Soares came up with that. Me, Dennis, and him. Yeah, man, you're a butcher. But yeah, you weren't allowed to elbow, so it just slowed down the ground and pound game. Just couldn't get the guy out of there.
Yeah,
But it's
no,
funny. My screensaver, actually, my logo for my jiu-jitsu MMA is actually a screenshot from me pounding him from guard. It's like this kind of a stylized picture of that in the background of the logo.
cool. Yeah,
so
now,
right, he rolls with me always.
and here, so now you got your 2-fight winning streak in a show that, you're fighting overseas, you're going there. Now it's starting to feel a little bit bigger and stuff like that. Then you get invited, you fight. Now, you mentioned him earlier. So did you know Bobby Southworth from before, obviously?
Oh yeah, from the show. Like we rode around for, like they even had, like when we were they're doing the pilot, they even had us do all the pre-fight medicals. Like they had MRI, like all of my pre-fight medicals were done, everything, right? And initially they were trying to tell me that I didn't get the fight because and be able to put in the show because I had something wrong with my MRI. Well, they said maybe I had a sinus infection or something, but I mean it was just kind of a bit of a crock of bullshit. But anyway, yeah. So I got to fight him in the Playboy Mansion, and that was a kind of a weird one because we were up against the cage. I was fishing for a guillotine, and then he took me down. When we hit the ground, I popped my rib out. And and it was excruciating if you ever popped a rib. It made some horrible groaning sound. He sat back to punch me, and he looks at my face, and I guess it must have looked like I was dying. And I remember him even saying, he's like, "You okay, man?" I'm like, no, I think I'm dying. And he never even hit me. So super nice guy. He could have starched me there, but yeah, no, I ended up spending the night in UCLA Medical Center with all the gunshot victims, and missed the after party at the Playboy Mansion.
Yeah, that's not the way you want to go out at the Playboy Mansion, but Talk about
Yeah.
the build up to that show. What did you see there that you remember? Because it is kind of legendary. And that's also was my last show as Bodog.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. I mean, Playboy Mansion is, you know, they're like, hey, you want to fight the Playboy Mansion? I'm like, sure. I don't know who.
Yeah.
Yeah, doesn't matter. The same with Forrest Griffin when the UFC called me up. Joe Silva, he's like, hey, you know, Joe Silva. I'm like, okay. Says, you guys want to fight? Sure, done. He goes, you want to know who and where? And I said, no, I just send the contract. All right. I mean, there's certain things you don't turn down, right? You want to fight the Playboy Mansion? Yep.
Yep.
It was cool. I mean, they put us up in the parking lot in tents, and there was a bunch of cool people on the card, and it was all in all a super cool experience, right? You know, barring the losing and that kind of thing, but what do you do?
Yeah, and at that point, now, so let me ask you here. At that point, I left Bodog, and Bodog was going to start to, you know, I think they did a couple of smaller shows after that, but that was really the last hurrah big show. And they kind of, a lot of the roster went to Strikeforce. Was that a possibility for you? Did you talk to the Strikeforce people? Because, you know, that might have been a good move for you. Or at this point, were you not getting attention?
I don't know. Yeah, not really. Strikeforce was never really kind of on the horizon. I mean, there was a few other promotions that would kind of had popped up. I had Travis Galbraith fight. Remember, Elite XC was there for a little while. You know, there was a little talk there. We did that one card in because they were pretty short lived, right?
Yeah.
We did one card in what the hell was it? Stockton, and Nate fought Thomas Denny on that card.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. So there was some talk there and different ones, but you know, nothing really sussed out.
Yeah. Now you took a couple of years off, but then in 2009, you kind of, I don't know, would you call it a comeback? You back to King of the Cage, and you went on a nice winning streak again.
Yeah, so I mean, I was down in Vancouver. That was, you know, running the fortress, and you know, I'm running the gym and teaching guys and working a lot. But I mean, I still wanted to fight. It was just a matter of, you know, picking some fights that you wanted to have, and you wanted to have some fun at them. I think by that point in my career, I was, you know, I wasn't trying to take big crazy fights against really hard guys. You know, you want to go, you know, scratch the itch and have some fun, and you know, and pick some fun fights. And I think that's kind of how, you know, it ended up. I went on a bit of a streak, picked up the Canadian King of the Cage belt, and yeah, and that was really kind of, you know,
That's how you go out. But that, you know, a lot of people don't get to go out with a 4-fight winning streak, no matter, you know, where, you know what I mean? So that must feel pretty good, no?
Oh yeah, and you got to remember, like at that point in time, the only guy that was really older than me scrapping was Randy.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, I was already, you know, 40 something.
Yeah, for sure. You were definitely, that makes your party. So what's up with were you with Dennis at some of his big fights? Did you go to corner him in Pride, or when he went over to Japan or Korea?
Yeah, most of them. Yeah, most of them. I was with him when he did the K1 fight. I was with him when he was in the tournament. It was funny. I was cornering him when he knocked out Ninja. I ruptured my vocal cord and I was mute for like 7 months waiting on surgery.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
no.
so excited. Yeah. Yeah, no,
With,
Dennis and I were, you know, we're still really tight, but we're pretty tight. So I not only was I fighting, but I was busy cornering guys. Like I was all over. I was with Keijan all over the place, and Dennis all over the place, and then like the whole slew of all the other guys. So we were traveling a lot.
Yeah, that's that coach part where you know, you became a coach right away, and everybody relies on you, and you know that's first is being reliable, I guess, you know.
Oh yeah, and I mean, and it's good, right? Like even this last number of years with IMAF, like I got involved in the amateurs, and I've been to, you know, with the amateur stuff, and then again pro with Brave. Alex Martinez, he's fighting in PFL right now, is one of my guys. He's in the 12-man tournament for the million. But I mean, you know, we've been to Abu Dhabi, we've been to Jordan, we've been to South Africa. You know, you're just all over the place.
Cool. So that's kind of what you want. Just stay happy. It's your goals haven't changed much, and that's kind of cool. You just live your life and fight on the side.
Yeah, and I mean, and that's exactly it, right? And have fun doing it. And the title was kind of nice because it was they put that on, there wasn't a whole lot of guys at that, right? So so it was a cool fight. He was another guy. That was Bill Mahood. He was another big, thick, super strong, difficult dude.
Yeah. When you went with Dennis, what was the biggest show you went to? Your biggest fight memory? Maybe the
No, it
Russian.
would have been Pride, probably at the Saitama Super Arena, and I don't know, there was 70, 80,000 people there. Like it was crazy. Like same with Bibby cornering him. Like we were to some big ones, but that what was it, the 185 pound or 83 kilo tournament?
Yeah.
Um, it had Ninja and all these guys in it, and Dennis was in it. And that one event, I believe it was a New Year's Eve show, and it was just ridiculous. It was so big.
Now they kind of double crossed Dennis on that one, because there was a thing where I think he was going to fight Paulo Filho, but Paulo Filho pulled out, and or I think the replacement was supposed to be a certain person, and they slipped him the Japanese opponent, and something went wrong for Dennis there because he was cruising until the finals where it was a little bit of a setup. What was your experience? Well, take us through that, from your perspective.
Well, I mean, Pride was obviously, it came out later that the words connections were and stuff. I always liked Pride. I thought they took good care of us and stuff. But I mean, people got to understand, promoters are promoters, and they're there to make money and to do what's right for the promotion. They're not so much looking out for the cogs in the machine. And once you remember that, or you realize that, then you go into it with a little more clear head. So they were just doing what was going to be good for them. So Dennis was in there. I forget who we fought. I mean, I don't know if it was Ninja first, but yeah, he went in and he ended up in the one fight, he tore his bicep, and then he ended up with was it Saksiyama?
Yeah.
Anyway, Akiyama in there, and then basically there was some talk that the gloves might have been weighted because he's got an eye injury, and then he had the torn bicep, and they got him in the corner, and he just couldn't see, and he got TKO'd. And then afterwards, there was some talk and trying to get a hold of gloves. And, of course, there's no commission. So there's all these allegations. You don't know how many of them are true or not true. And yeah, it was Pride was always super cool, but very different, like just how they do things.
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody's in a suit. So you don't think off the top of your head that they're crooked, but everybody, everybody in the suit's crooked. So very interesting experience there. What about the young guy, Kijan? He made it to UFC. So, how's your experience there?
Well, I mean, same thing. He started with me at 17, and well, he got to that point where he needed to go to Vancouver, get out of Prince George. He was starting to, he won a couple titles in Canada. He lost the King of the Cage title at 155 against Roy McDonald before Roy moved up to 170 and went on. Yeah, Kajan is a really good fighter, and he got into the UFC. Well, he had a couple times where he was going down for the show and didn't make it, but then he got pulled in on that Canada versus Australia, I think it was.
Okay.
And so he was in the house on that one, and then he lost to the hell was his name? Canadian boxer. I forget his name now. Little thick guy, but he ended up fighting Bang for his first UFC fight in Vancouver, and was winning that fight. I was cornering with Faraz because at that point in time he Revolution had closed, so he'd moved from Vancouver to Montreal and was training there. And he was winning the fight, but he just got caught with a big hook right at the very end of the fight and got knocked out. But they got $50,000 fight of the night bonus. So that was him barely scrubbing by. Now he's got enough money where he can actually do fight camps and stuff, and we went on and we did some good fights, right? I mean, we beat Stevie Ray. We fought in Russia. I mean, I think that what the hell was the one Russian's name? We got robbed in Russia. Like everyone said, he won the fight, but of course they didn't get the decision. Lost Islam by armbar in Calgary. So he had a good run, and we fought in Ireland, we fought in England. So a bunch of travel. yeah, it was a good run, and you know, and they treat you decent. I had no real complaints. I mean, the pay could have been way better, and you know, and a few little things like more than one hotel room would be nice, and you know, stuff like that. But for the most part, you know, it's good experiences. And again, you got to remember these guys are putting on fights to make money. They're not putting on fights to, you know, make your life better.
Yeah, yeah. All right, Bill, we've been going for about an hour and a half. Any, you know, fill people in on your routine today, because we've touched on it a little bit, but I know obviously you're still active in the martial arts. So just go over your daily martial art routine, train in the morning, train in the evening, and we'll close with this.
Well, I'm old and broken, so you know you got to do what you got to do. But I mean, I tend to get a lift in 3 times a week. I teach, like I work a typical job. I'm usually, you know, my job is installation company. I do all the estimating for. So basically, it's not a hard physical job. You drive around, measure stuff, talk to people. But I'm at the gym every night from 7 to 9. You know, teaching classes Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We do an open roll on Friday, so I go in to just roll recreationally myself on Friday, and then we do a holy rollers on Sunday, and we do sparring on Saturday. So I'm in there, 7 days a week, and yeah, and it's not every day do I roll because I got to get smart, and if you roll every day and you're old and broken, you're just not going to be more old and broken. So you got to be smart not to to understand what's going on with the body. But yeah, I'm in there all the time, still really, really like it. And, it becomes a big part of your life.
So we'll close with this here. So you started out kind of, with your dad's influence as a boxing guy, and now I think you said 3-stripe black belt and in jiu-jitsu and stuff like that. So compare the two also, because in your older age, you're doing jiu-jitsu, whereas I think boxing training probably would be a little easier on the body at this age. Don't you think so? Talk about how that, you drifted away from boxing, or is that still part of your world? Just talk about that philosophy.
No, I mean, one of my students, like we got a few of my guys that, their living is coaching and training and teaching. And I've got one of my students, he's kind enough he'll hold pads for me. So that helps with the cardio. And I really like banging away on pads because, you say one of the last things that goes is power. So, you bang away on the pads and such. And I like that because like you said, it's probably one of the easier things. I like lifting a bit because again, it's not hurting me. With jiu-jitsu, I got to be careful because I've got some really good students, and so I got to stay away from some of the bigger guys or some of the rougher guys because the last thing you need is to get pretzeled up and then your back's out for 6 months. And last year I went through a real back thing where it was looking like I was going to have back surgery, so I avoided it. So you just got to be smart, but you need to get in there all the time, and it's tough because jiu-jitsu's just become such an addiction that if I don't get to roll, I get real grumpy. So it's you got to get in there and do what you can. So you get to roll with some of the smaller people, some of the the good kids, and some of the newer people you can control. And then you got to be real careful with who you go with that's big or has got an axe to grind.
Have you thought about training somebody for the bare knuckle stuff that's been going around? That looks to be I would think that's up your alley.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I wouldn't think I'm a technical enough boxing coach to, because that wasn't the thing. I was kind of the MMA coach always, the mixed martial arts guys. Like we had a wrestling, we had a boxing coach, we had a kickboxing coach. I was the kind of guy who put it all together. I wouldn't think that would be probably, I wouldn't have the expertise to take someone to a decent level with that.
Would you have done it if it had been, 15 years earlier?
Oh, hell yeah. That looks fun. Yeah. And I mean, before I ever had my first MMA fight, I probably had over, 50 street fights. So, you're getting used to getting punched in the face, and you realize it doesn't hurt that bad. So it's not that big of a deal. And I mean, with the boxing fight, you only got to worry about getting punched. At least no one's trying to flying knee in the, in the grill or take you down. And it just seems like a simpler thing. No one's kicking your legs, thank God.
Yeah.
So
yeah, no,
it's quite fun.
I think for the old, a lot of guys, if the retirement comes in MMA at the right time, you can get a couple of bare knuckle fights in and hopefully make some money, but also get over that, competition feeling and stuff. Bill, it's been great catching up with you because I in the boxing history, there's a lot of boxing tragedies. You know what I mean? And I harp on this here, where you run into people and it's like they're not doing well and stuff, and it's great. MMA has avoided that in the large part. There's not a lot of there are guys doing life in jail, and there are guys that have passed and things like that. But you're not bitter, and you could be, because the UFC didn't call you back. You maybe
Yeah.
you're a little younger, and your chance to there are a lot of things there where you might have regrets and you don't. You seem to be a guy that has put it together real good, and you continue going strong. A lifelong martial artist.
Yeah, and I'm lucky, right? I've had my wife's been with me through the whole part. Like, I mean, if like I always tell my guys, guys will be like, well, what does it take to get to the next level? I said, you need a sugar mama. You need a woman who makes enough money that she can pay the bills while your broke ass is trying to train and and fight for $3 grand. You need a sugar mama, so that helps. And she's been with me the whole time. I mean, my boy's 18. He just got accepted to a prestigious university for engineering. So my other younger son is still in high school, and he's knocking it out of the park. So I mean, there's lots of good stuff. And you're down at the gym, and you get to see these guys training and getting somewhere. And whether they win or they lose, you're on that roller coaster with them. So I got this guy next weekend who's going to do an amateur fight. And hopefully he'll win, and you get that little, you get to suck a little bit of that joy out of the win. And if he loses, of course, you suck a little bit of the depression out of the loss. So I mean, it's still great to get in there and be around all these people that you've known for so long.
That's awesome, Bill. I'm going to go ahead and cut it off, and thank you very much for that, because we spent an hour and a half, and it was well worth it, documenting the career of a true Canadian pioneer here. Thanks, Bill.
Cool. Well, I appreciate you giving me a call. It's always love to talk MMA. I can talk to MMA all night.
Cool. We'll call you back then. So at some point.
Thanks,
Thank you.